Podcast, and on today's podcast we're looking at the MotoGP season launch. We're looking at all of everyone's hot takes actually from our Patreon subscribers on patreon.com/Paddock Pass podcast, and then we're going to have our final thoughts on the Sepang test as well. So this podcast as ever is brought to you by Renthal Street, and you can check out renthal.com and you can buy all the different parts for your bikes: handlebars, chains, sprockets, mounts, everything, all on renthal.com. So check that out. As I said, on today's pod, we're going to have a quick look at the MotoGP launch, and we're going to take all of everyone's questions and comments from Patreon. But we're going to start off from the Sepang test. We're going to draw it to a close. And David Emmett, I want to come to you first, because you were in Sepang, you were in pit lane, and you were oogling and ogling all of the bikes. So I want to ask you, what was the one piece of new tech that you saw at Sepang that you're most interested for the rest of the season?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually more interesting now, going back and looking at all the photos I've taken and seeing all the stuff that I missed while I was there. The most impressive piece of tech, I think, was Ducati's new ride height device, which is even bigger, even more complex, and even more sophisticated than the last one. And the last one was absolutely massive. I mean, these things look huge now. Like, there's a massive chunk of aluminium in there with, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 different cylinders containing hydraulic fluid and God knows what else. That was just genuinely impressive. And you think they're adding all that much weight, all that weight to the bike. Normally, you'd kill your auntie just for the sake to get rid of that amount of weight. But here they are adding to it, and that's why it works. And I think Toprak Razgatlioglu was talking about his problem with the Michelin rear tire, that once it starts to spin, once you crack the throttle, you have to be very gentle with it to get it to drive, because as soon as it starts to spin, it never comes back again. And I think that this is one reason why Ducati are putting so much effort into getting this ride height device to work properly, because it's a way of keeping load on the rear while you're accelerating and stopping it from spinning. I mean, they're doing lots of other things with electronics, with engine character, with aerodynamics, all the rest of it. But the ride height device is a key part of that, of keeping the tire the tire in contact with the asphalt and stopping it from spinning.
Yeah, and it's always interesting to see all the different developments that we have coming into the test. And Adam Wheeler, I think that kind of brings us to one of the big pertinent questions for MotoGP as well. Is Sepang still the most suitable place for us to go for the test? Is it the best place for us to be able to use for pre-season testing with the shakedown and then the Sepang test? We've got 6 days of action at the track.
Well, first of all, Steve, everything is great and awesome in MotoGP. Great and awesome. That's just what I want to say.
Wheeler?
Have you just triggered someone to go off and assassinate Carmelo Espeleta or something? Is this sort of some Manchurian Candidate style?
No, Dave. G&A. Everything is great and awesome.
Everyone loves G&A.
Sepang, of course, Steve, the logistics meant that Sepang was always an easy choice, principally for the Japanese, going back, 15, 20 years. Also, don't forget that the nature of the circuit itself, the riders were telling us in the media debriefs throughout the test that the combination of corners, of course, those vast straights, it pretty much works many areas of the motorcycle. I think Marc Marquez was obviously doing shorter runs to acclimatize to riding a GP bike again with his shoulder, but was saying that while he was riding, he was imagining different corners on other circuits and how the bike would feel in those places. So that's the disadvantage of only having 2 preseason tests. But Sepang does check a box. There was a time, I think, when you could rely on the weather quite steadfastly. I mean, it would be nice in the morning, it would rain, everyone would have to wait, and then you might get back out again. And that happened on day 2, as we know, of the test. But I do wonder if there could be some extra benefit to having maybe a European, somewhere a bit more tighter, more compact, somewhere like Jerez, which
is underwater at the moment.
Yeah, Andalusia is having some terrible storms at the moment. But a place like Jerez would probably offer a little bit more in terms of diversity, perhaps. But of course, then you've got the logistics. Yeah.
It's always interesting as well, Adam, because like you mentioned about Jerez, David, you've mentioned about the weather in Jerez. we've just had 4 days of World Superbike testing in Jerez and Portimao, where there was 2 hours of dry weather running. And it's really interesting for me because we have 12 rounds in our championship, and then we've got these 2 test days as well. But all the talk in World Superbikes is, why are we still going to Jerez and Portimao when over the course of the last years we've lost a lot of running? We need to go to Malaysia. We need to do this. But it's always balanced off by the cost. Now, we have 12 rounds. The cost of doing that Iberian test is the same as doing an extra round. And Neil, I think it kind of comes down to, is the cost worth it for testing? Or are we better off whenever we've got so many rounds, just going straight to the first round and maybe doing something like what we do in World Superbikes, where we have the 2-day test in advance of round one, but basically reduce the amount of testing just to be able to have it where you keep those costs down?
I mean, I think we are edging ever further towards that model with 22 races. But there has to be one standalone test where you can kind of test things out and then go back and correct it before the actual season starts. I mean, generally speaking, the less testing you do, maybe the funner it is. But with the current situation, you obviously want to give the factories that are trying to catch up an opportunity to do so. And we know that the current weekend format in MotoGP is just it's so rushed and everything is so pressurized that essentially on a Friday afternoon you have to be doing qualifying times. You have to bed in your bike in FP1. Then practice is all about making sure you're inside that top 10, and it really doesn't leave you much time for testing at all. So I don't think the race weekend really is a kind of suitable place to be testing big new things. You can maybe refine things, but yeah, you definitely need at least a day or two to kind of put them through the paces, and also just to get everyone up to speed again.
I mean, the other thing is that the difference between World Superbikes and MotoGP is there's a lot more freedom in development. You can develop your engine, you can build a completely new chassis. There's all of the aero and stuff, and that really needs time to develop and to be adjusted. They need that sort of 3 weeks, really ideally a month between the first test and the last and the first race to be able to make final adjustments before it starts. So World Superbikes, because the technical rules are locked down a lot more, there's a lot less they can do.
Yeah, that's very true. And just about that, Dave, as well, just for the developments for other manufacturers, you talked about Ducati's ride height. What's the other things that we're going to see whenever we get to round one where everyone's going to be talking about on a certain bike, they've got this part?
The big thing that everyone noticed but nobody could explain was KTM starts. Normally, when the bikes start, you can hear them hitting the limiter as they take away, because they set the launch control at a specific rev limit. They hit the throttle and go away, and then you can hear the engine through launch control before it finally sort of gets out of launch control, hits a certain rev or a certain speed, and then just takes off. The KTMs, we know the KTMs are already good at starting, but the KTM was just taking off. It sounded almost like a scooter from the lights. It was so smooth. It was just boom, gone. Oh, nothing aggressive, nothing like that. There's a very, very famous old quote, and I can't remember who it came from. And it was someone turned up to Daytona, saw one of the other bikes riding around, and said, "Looks like we got behind on our cheating." And it very much felt like that watching the KTM's take off, because their launch control stuff is amazing, and the start is really, really important. So that was fascinating to me.
I cut across you there, Steve. I'm saying, I wonder if there'd be any kind of improvements also, Dave, to the whole shot device. Because if KTM are so, if they've made strides forwards in terms of their starting prowess, then they're going to need to be getting those things unhooked for certain circuits. Say like maybe Saxon Ring or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's always really, really tricky. Or, Assen, not so much. Phillip Island, for example. Yeah, there's a few of those places where sort of unhooking that's really difficult to see. But you could see that all of the factories were putting more resources into it, despite the fact that these things are all going away. I was talking to a mechanic over there, and they were saying they're going to be delighted when it goes away, because at the moment it takes so much time to swap out a left handlebar if someone crashes, because there's all of these cables going there. They're going there for the ride height device, going there for the whole shot device, and all the rest of it. That it just takes so much extra time. They're literally going to sort of gain about a minute every time they swap out a left handlebar when a rider crashes.
Just in relation to each of the manufacturers, we're going to go through them one by one just for a very quick look at what each of them each do back at base before we get to round one. Do you want to go from worst to first or best to worst?
Worst. Go on, go worst to first, because we all know who that is.
Let's go straight to Ducati then. They've obviously had a disaster. Neil, when you look at Yamaha and their winter, what's the one line that you'd say, the one topic that you think that they really need to make a big improvement on going into Buriram? Where's their focus?
Well, this was to sum up basically what we saw at Sepang in a sentence, right? So mine was press panic button. Because it was a bit grim. I mean, we spoke about this on our previous show, but I mean, Yamaha have still so much work to do. I mean, the engine is the big thing. Top speed is still really lacking. You feel that they still don't trust fully completely their new engine. I think Peter Baum said something quite interesting on one of the Paddock Note shows you did with him, Dave. Now he saw 3 different engine starters that Yamaha mechanics were using, so there are obviously still quite a few variations to what they're testing there. And reliability, top speed isn't great, but also listening to Jack Miller just talking about the sort of chassis and swing arm variations that he was testing during the day. Quite substantial, which again leads you to think that they're nowhere near finding a kind of settled base setup. So yeah, I mean, everything really, it seems.
My one-line definition for Yamaha would be: don't spread yourself too thin. But I think that's probably way too late for that. But yeah, it's a case of trying to make a radical motorcycle for them competitive in a matter of months before everything kind of switches over and morphs into the 850. And I don't know how much shared technology there would be between the two platforms. Probably more than you think, but still, it's a mammoth task they've undertaken.
Yeah, I mean, when I predicted that they wouldn't build a V4 for precisely this reason, because they are so far away from building a competitive bike. They have so much to learn. So, like my one line resume for what they've got to do this year is just throw it away. It's a learning year. Just keep learning and try to build something good for 27.
And it's almost one of those situations where, would it almost benefit them not having Fabio Quartararo this year? Would it have benefited them just having a diligent rider like, Jack Miller, who understands the situation and is willing to put his head down and do the work? I kind of feel like in Rins and Miller, and to a lesser extent Toprak, because he accepts that he's not going to be able to do too much this year as a rookie on a new project. Yeah, they might not be shouting their mouths off, let's say, when things are not going particularly well. Whereas Quartararo, yeah, that might be a different story altogether.
It'll be fine. It'll be fine. He'll be talking about his Honda contract. Just let him talk about going to Honda and just head down, nose to the grindstone.
Fabio's will be, why have I wasted another year? For Honda then, what about them, Dave?
Honda, I mean...
Other than just saying Fabio's coming next year.
Yeah, well, Honda, yeah, exactly. Fabio is coming next year. They're really close, and it's just more refinement. The only thing they're missing is grip. So, it's just more small steps forward, and they're going to get there.
I'm not sure I agree with Dave, actually. I don't think Honda actually are that close. It'll be really cool to see the progression in the results. But based on the Sepang test, I think it's a case of as you were, gentlemen. I think I said on the last podcast, it felt a little bit like they were treading water. The riders in their debriefs didn't sound overly enthused. Perhaps we have to be distracted by maybe the progress of Diogo Moreira to see something different. I don't know.
Yeah, we should be able to see some progress from Moreira through the course of the year, obviously. But for me, when I look at it, I don't see it with Honda either. But I think that's down to the riders. They don't have a top tier rider. And people can look at Mir, and he has a world championship, and no one's going to take that away from him. But there's no one in the paddock really believes that Joan Mir is a tier 1 rider. And then we don't know where Honda are at right now. Luca Marini definitely isn't. Zarco is too old and was never really that rider anyway. And then Diogo's in as a rookie, so we don't know where Honda are at, and we won't know until they put Quartararo onto the bike, if and when that's sorted. But Neil, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, just to echo what Dave was saying, find more rear grip, because it seems like in the other aspects of the bike, they made a step forward. And it was interesting, I was speaking to someone involved with Honda who was just saying that both the riders did seem a bit down after the test. I think it was that sprint simulation on the final day, which put into context just how fast Ducati, and in particular Alex Marquez, was over 10 laps, and just how much of a step it is to kind of try and reach that. And yeah, Honda have made fantastic progress over the past 18 months, but to make that final half tenth is going to be, seriously difficult. But compare this to so many previous pre-seasons for Honda, and it's still very impressive. I still think they're in a pretty good situation, and I don't think anyone's expecting them to be consistent challengers at the front this year. But if they can replicate, I think, what they were doing in the second part of last year, then that's a positive. That's a solid season ahead for them.
Yeah, I think that's very fair, Neil. We'll come to you first, Neil, for KTM as well. Then, what's your opinion on them?
My opinion on KTM was probably to address its turning, and maybe also to address again the vibrations that its riders were suffering from. Noticed that Enea Bastianini and Pedro Acosta were saying that they both ran into slightly unexpected problems during their sprint simulations. Bastianini saying the vibration from the front and the rear was quite pronounced. Said it was not as bad as it was last year, but then you got the impression from speaking to him that last year was really, really quite bad. And then one or two of the riders were just saying, compared to the rivals, I think the turn-in with KTM is not quite what it needs to be. Again, steps forward, I think, for the orange bikes. Looks like they're a little closer to the front this year, but again, like Honda, is it quite enough?
I would say for KTM, what is the price of 2 weeks? Because I think it was Sebastian Rieser, the technical coordinator, was saying that they gathered a lot of data from a lot of parts and a lot of ideas in Sepang. But do they really have the time? Do they really have the possibilities to assimilate that and get something new on the bikes for Buriram? Be very curious to see how the riders do in the 2 days test, because the Grand Prix was not easy at all for the 4 KTM riders in 2025. But I think they're getting closer. I do think they're making sort of marginal gains. You can see that from the components they had on the RC16s in Sepang, and some experimental stuff of aerodynamics. You also have perhaps at least 2 of the riders from the 4 really out to prove a point, and they're riding for their futures. You'd assume that somebody like Brad Binder and Maverick Vinales would want to stay in KTM Orange. So I think those factors, combined, means that they're probably the most mysterious manufacturer on the grid at the moment.
And not many crashes. Sorry to butt in, Dave, but how many crashes did Pedro have last season at Sepang Test? 2 or 3? And he said he was riding fairly quickly and not feeling like he was absolutely at his 100%, and that can only be a good thing, you feel.
Yeah, exactly. As it happens, I'm right in the middle of writing up KTM from my perspective on KTM from the test. And the one thing that I really noticed is that last year you went down into the garage and there were 4 completely different bikes down there. This year there are 4 exactly the same bikes in the 4 different garages. The feedback is very similar from them all. They're all using more or less the same parts. There's a much clearer sense of direction. So I'm much more optimistic about KTM this year because of where they are. If you look at the progress they made over 25, if they can repeat that in 26, starting from a stronger situation, I think KTM are in really good shape.
Yeah, I think as well, KTM is probably the most interesting manufacturer to keep an eye on, because if Acosta does leave to go to Ducati, then all 3 riders are in play, because KTM can't change everyone. So Vinales, obviously after the strong start last year, there's a good case to be made for him to stay and be moved up to the factory team. For Binder, for Bastianini, they're super under pressure because there's young Moto2 riders coming through. So they have to deliver right from the start of the season. So for me, I think KTM is probably going to be the one manufacturer that, even if they're not at the front, they're probably actually the most interesting to keep an eye on over the course of the first few rounds. And then for Aprilia, we'll come to them next. And Adam, what do you think about Aprilia's prospects after what we saw in Sepang?
Well, Steve, just quickly going back to KTM, purely because he's a Red Bull KTM AO rider at the moment, but what's all this talk I see about Colin Vaya, making inroads or appearing on sort of the MotoGP grid roster for 2027? Dave, I can see you're suppressing a grin there as a half Dutchman, but it does seem a little presumptuous that Colin might be in a position to, make the jump. I would have thought somebody like Senna Agius or, a couple of other candidates in Moto2 would be ahead of him.
Yeah, I mean, like Alonso and Holgado are a long way ahead of him. I think I think also because Vaya just had a horrific year last year. He had a couple of tragedies in the family. He had a serious injury. A lot went wrong. And considering the terrible sort of personal life in his personal year that he had, or year in his personal life, sorry, he did really well. But I do think that 27 is going to be too early for him. I think he's absolutely nailed on for 28. But let's see about that. I think he's certainly an attractive passport, but there's much more than that. I see Barry Baltus going up before Colin Vaya.
And just coming back to Aprilia, my one line for them would be man the tiller, because I think they made improvements in Sepang, which was, as we said in the last podcast, a pretty difficult track for them. Bezzecchi's just sort of going from strength to strength in terms of confidence and belief in the package. And then, of course, Trackhouse as well. You also have two riders are going to be pushing for their futures, as factory supported riders with Aprilia. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of potential there. Aside, I mean, the only black mark, I guess you could say appropriately, is just the Jorge Martin affair and what he decides to do, where he decides to go. Because if he's one of the riders to early announce that he's jumping ship, then that also makes them a little bit weaker, I think, for at least the first half of the season.
To me, they just have to keep Jorge Martin healthy. They have to get him on the bike, get him riding, not necessarily because he's going to sort of win everything, but just because he's going to be able to show how fast the bike is alongside Bezzecchi. Bezzecchi was fantastic. He was really, really good during the test. He'd been really, really competitive. The bike is really good. They had lots of... I think really good, subtle, useful aero upgrades that is going to make the bike better. The riders all said it's a little bit better everywhere. So yeah, I think Aprilia have made a huge step. The question is whether it's as huge a step as Ducati made.
Yeah, my kind of throwaway line for Aprilia would be wrap your second rider in cotton wool. Make sure that he gets through Thailand with no dramas, because Jorge Martin needs time on the bike. And I was writing a season preview recently, and it did strike me that it was quite remarkable that Aprilia managed to have the season they had last year and to have the test at Sepang they had, where essentially Lorenzo Savadori forfeited his testing duties for much of last year because he was having to do stand-in rides for Martin, and Martin wasn't even there for the group part of the year, and Martin is still nowhere even near comfortable on the bike. So get him up and firing, and that can only be a further enhancement to the project. So keep Martin healthy.
My hot take on Aprilia is that they actually benefited hugely from Martin's absence, because it allowed Savadori to actually develop the bike, do all the developed work that needed doing during the race weekends, and be able to transfer that immediately to the other side of the garage. Savadori, absolutely sort of hats off to Lorenzo Savadori for the Stakhanov work he's been doing with some cold water on his neck, because he said his body was just destroyed from doing, something like 2,000 kilometers over the course of 6 days. And 2,000 kilometers over the course of 6 days doesn't sound much until you realize that you're doing it on a MotoGP bike at 350 odd Ks an hour.
Yeah, in that heat and humidity as well.
Oh, well, yes. There's also the very small motor, and it was genuinely, last year was surprisingly cool. It was actually lovely last year because it was like 28 degrees or something, which is really nice. This year it was really hot. It was 35 degrees, quite humid and quite dry.
I find it interesting that, Neil, you mentioned about keeping your second rider wrapped in cotton wool. That's the former world champion as well. And obviously for Aprilia, Bezzecchi is the man to lead their charge for this year, but it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Martin. Let's move it on to Ducati. And we've already talked about their upgrades to the bike for this year with Dave talking about the ride height device. But what about Ducati for you, Neil?
We're looking at one takeaway. It's pretty much just confirmed their aero, I think, for 2026, and it seems then they're on their way, really. I think Dijan Antonio said at the end of the Sepang test they were at 90% set up for Buriram, just one or two final little things to work on. It did seem that they were going through quite a lot of aero items over the 3 days. I think at one point Marc Marquez had 4 different combinations between new aero from 2025. And at one point, it did seem like he was maybe favouring last year's aero over the new stuff. But otherwise, yeah, everything is looking pretty strong. And you just had to look at the sort of performance on the final day, on the timesheets, and the consistency with the sprint simulations to see that.
Yeah, I mean, my take for Ducati is start work on 2027 because you're sorted for 26.
Adam, what about you?
Goodness, one line for Ducati. I think more like one word, and that's damn.
Bastards.
I mean, yeah,
that would be what most of the grid are thinking about them.
Yeah, factor Marc Marquez in for an emphatic title defense, but also Bagnaia seemed much more comfortable, much more 100%. Optimistic. Of course, Bagnaia was the epitome of the Sepang test in how too much can be read into something or a situation too soon. We do have to get into sort of the meat of the season, I think, to see if Bagnaia really is back to anything like the double title winning best that he was. But like I think Neil pointed out as well, Digia, a couple of other riders, somebody like Aldeguer, once he's fit again, is going to be progressing. Alex Marquez, the strengths and the confidence that he found last year. I mean, just across the board. The only thing now is that according to sort of like an interview I did with Gigi Diolinha, when he said, if the Sepang test goes well, we can focus more on the 850. I wonder how that will affect Ducati's priorities for development when it comes to things like the Jerez test, how they'll be able to manage, again, having those two projects as well as trying to continue all those statistics like 88 consecutive podiums and 6 constructors titles in a row. 2026 could be a route, but then it could also be more difficult for them in terms of resources.
Yeah, shout out to Alex Marquez, by the way, because he was just really, really impressive at the test. He was fast, fast over a single lap, fast over race pace. We know that Sepang is a track that he suits, but he just looked really good, and he was doing a lot of important work as well. So keep it. He is one to watch this year again.
Yeah, and just for everyone watching on YouTube, leave your comment underneath with your one line on any of the individual manufacturers as well. We actually have been pretty busy on YouTube in recent months as well, so keep an eye on that. But just for us to move on to the MotoGP launch as well, we'll talk pretty quickly about this. Obviously, in Kuala Lumpur, we were able to see the season underway effectively and the official launch of it. I thought it was quite cool seeing all the MotoGP bikes out there on the street track. Obviously with the rain and everything else, it put a bit of a dampener on it, but it looked really good. I thought it was a big step forward to see everyone out there on their actual race bikes rather than the road bikes like we had in Bangkok last year. But what did you make of it all, Neil?
I mean, it looked pretty decent, I would say. Something in the middle of one of the world's most well-known cities, kind of between the Twin Towers, where you have a very clear, iconic landmark. Looked as though there were a lot of people there. I've heard sort of attendance figures vary between 5,000 and 20,000. But it certainly on the TV screens looked like there was plenty of people there. And yeah, just to see MotoGP bikes going down Main Street through the middle of a city certainly looked quite cool. I mean, I don't think I'm the person to ask about whether I was head banging to the script, or I can't even remember the name of the other act. But each to their own. I guess there is an argument to make regarding whether this kind of thing should be in a market that is less well known to MotoGP. I mean, I think we can say that Malaysia and Southeast Asia in general is pretty MotoGP mad and knows the brand and knows the series quite well, knows the characters in there quite well. But I'm sure you guys have some thoughts on that too.
I thought it made MotoGP look fantastic, and it has to be something I think that they stamp on an annual basis. It has to be done. And, I think we've seen it. It's something that Formula One have been doing for a while, where they get these demo cars into city centres, maybe to a lesser extent in recent years when they've had GPs popping up in more street circuits, but just taking the sport out into an alien environment. And for me, the biggest thing, I think, as Neil mentioned, was using the GP bikes. Okay, you have the commercial tie-in of using production bikes, street bikes, because, watching the likes of Brad Binder and Pedro Acosta sort of hooning around on little 125 Dukes can be quite fun. But hearing the GP bikes being revved, was it 130 decibels, the MotoGP noise limit? I mean, the FIM want to bring that down. I don't understand why. Of course, I know why. It's the environmental thing, but MotoGP is like a spectacle. It's not as if it's bursting eardrums at circuits around the world every single weekend. But having that there was a big appeal. And I think the event needs to discover really what it's about and what it's for. Is it going to be like an online thing? Is it going to be something that works purely on the ground, more for spectators, which I think is probably its biggest value, and that's why you need to go to a major sort of city somewhere and introduce MotoGP, whether it's somewhere near the Eiffel Tower in Paris. Just get people looking and thinking, what the hell is that noise? Generate some more interest. You might gain 5,000 more fans, but people just like looking out of curiosity, which has some tangible benefit.
Yeah, I thought that all of that is very true. And Dave, I know that you were really interested in Adam's piece that he wrote on Substack as well, which was a really interesting article just about the launch and the basically the challenges of trying to promote a championship and have it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I did enjoy Adam's piece, and I think he really nailed it with the question, like, who exactly is this for? I didn't see the launch because I was sat on an airplane at Kuala Lumpur airport, waiting to take off because we were basically stuck in the storm and they couldn't let us take off. So I didn't watch it. Then again, it's not really for me. I am not the target audience. I do think it's really important that they use the real MotoGP bikes because there is nothing quite like the sound of a MotoGP bike. I also understand why the FIM want to change it, in part because of the noise, but also because the sound, the noise limit is measured at 5,500 revs, which is, basically pretty much sort of max revs for a Norton Manx from 1949, but we're a little bit further on. Those bikes idle at 3,800 or 4,000. Something needs to be done about that. But yeah, I mean, the spectacle, I just wish they had good music, and they should let me choose the music for MotoGP because it would be so much better.
Go on, Dave.
Jesus,
explain.
Dave.
Explain. You can't make a comment like that and not expand.
We need properly exciting music and not cheesy, stale, old 20-year-old acceptable rock. We need something. We need Die Spitz playing "Throw Yourself to the Sword" rather than the script.
But people could go and see ABBA the musical, Dave. They don't need it to perform in a MotoGP.
In fairness, I did see Danny from the script just wandering through Rathmines a few weeks ago. He didn't seem to be telling everyone about the MotoGP launch at the time, though. But just when we look at it as well, we've obviously been pretty busy on Patreon over the course of the last couple of months in the off season. We're going to keep that up all the way through the season. Patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast, where we've got multiple different tiers for anyone to subscribe and to support the podcast. On our VIP and our Paddock Experts tier, we have it where you're able to join us on a Zoom call to be able to basically ask anything you want about MotoGP, World Superbikes racing, and everything else in general as well. But Neil, you put a call out to all of our patrons to get their hot takes on what we saw at Sepang.
I did indeed, yeah. And we asked them to be wild and crazy, not at all measured and reasoned. So the kind of the wilder, the better.
And I think that we can go straight to one of those with Tim Higgs saying that Jorge Martin will once again be outperformed by Dave's favorite rider, Raul Fernandez. So, Dave, what do you think about that from Tim?
Jorge Martin is just so much faster than Raul Fernandez. However, Jorge Martin also has bones made of the finest porcelain. So there's every chance that Raul Fernandez will end up scoring more points than him. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're choosing on the two in terms of talent, there's just no question. Martin is also a lot more intelligent rider than Fernandez. But I do like the hubris of the prediction.
Yeah, and obviously Raul was the race winner last year, and we've got quite a few others that are related to Aprilia as well, and one of them came in from 47, and that was that Honda will finish above Aprilia in the Constructors' Championship. Just, Adam, for you on this, what has to happen for that to be the case other than hell freezing over? I do notice that Dave has a little scarf on today, so it is already quite cold in the Netherlands, but is it cold enough for hell to have frozen over and Honda to beat Aprilia?
I think that's being fantastical, Steve. But I mean, the problem with Aprilia is outside of Bezzecchi's consistency in the second half of 2025, you can't really predict what Ayagura is going to do in his second season. Raul Fernandez is a mystery. It's as much a battle of what he's got between the ears as what he's got between like his arms. But yeah, goodness. I mean, I like Honda's potential for consistency better, but I think, Aprilia really should be the closest challenger to Ducati for the championship.
This also leads us to one of our questions or comments that came in from Marcus. And Marcus has said that Alex Marquez will be the world champion, Neil, and he's going to take the number 1 plate to KTM.
It's maybe not that out there a comment. I mean, you can maybe just take Alex off the sentence written by Marcus, and I think it would be 100% correct. But
KTM?
Yeah, well, yeah, and KTM, of course, yeah. But I mean, Alex looks really good, has looked really good in preseason, and certainly doesn't look as though last year is going to be a one-year thing. Yeah, I mean, Alex, I think, is going to be top 2, top 3, maybe top 4 in the championship. I think that's not a completely out there shout.
Yeah, it also leads us into another one that we had, and it continues a trend and a theme. And M has said that Pecco will win the World Championship, and he'll then take the number 1 plate to Yamaha. And Adam, you've obviously been the biggest Pecco backer on the podcast last year. What's the chance of this happening?
He's got the bike, hasn't he? Just a case of whether he can get one up on his teammate. Oh, it's just so hard to call, isn't it? I think we'll see.
Have you seen who his teammate is?
Yeah, exactly, Dave. Exactly. I don't want to, they say what idiots, don't learn from their mistakes or whatever. So I don't want to get too optimistic for Pecco, but it just would be very humorous for the likes of Alex Marquez or Pecco Bagnaia or even someone like Digia to have a ridiculous run of results and then depart from Ducati for 2027.
Yeah, could well be the case. And it also leads us, Dave, to a different question we had in from Eamon Flanagan. And Eamon was asking, if Pecco has a good start to the year, will he be kept by Ducati? And this kind of leads us into something that we were half thinking about talking about in this pod, about what's the next announcement going to be in terms of rider contracts being confirmed, because it could well be the case that this is totally irrelevant for Pecco, because by the time the season starts, Ducati seats are full. Well,
this is exactly the point. Or it certainly sounds from talking to people in Sepang that the contract's already signed. It's already done and dusted. Basically, all of the factory all the factory seats are full, so there's no room there. So that means that either Pecco Bagnaia is on a different factory bike, or he will be on a Ducati in maybe VR46, something like that. But
do you really think he's going to accept going to a satellite team after winning 2 world championships and then basically being cold-shouldered by the factory?
Yeah, but it's VR46 now.
Yeah, but he would still have to be riding under a guy who looks at him with such disdain that it basically equates to a piece of excrement on the floor. I mean...
Yeah, no, I mean, that to me is the exact reason why he's not going to be at VR46 and not on a Ducati. Also just, I mean... The main motivation for riders leaving a factory is, they feel is disdain. They feel they haven't been treated with the respect that's due to them, and that, to me, certainly, I think Pecco Bagnaia doesn't feel like he's been treated with respect by Ducati with some justification. So I think he's off somewhere else.
Just in relation to VR46, can I ask you all a question? Is it actually a desirable seat, other than the fact that it's got the Ducati? The team doesn't ever seem particularly well organised in terms of comparisons to other MotoGP teams. If you want to be on a non-factory team, Gresini's obviously much more attractive than being on the VR46 bike.
I think, like in terms of, they have really strong engineers. They've got a good technical package. They've got good support. They've got good financial backing. The atmosphere is pretty good. It's not the same as Gresini. Gresini is something special. I mean, like, they really have managed to create a proper family atmosphere. VR46 just looks like a fun place to be rather than a proper family atmosphere. But you could do a lot worse.
And also, I think commercially, of course, they have Valentino Rossi in their corner, and he's still been able to pull in the backers. Was it, Pertamino is a significant sponsor for them. I think there are worse. How do you define worse? But I think as a satellite teams go, then VR46 is great, and I really hope Pecco doesn't go there, because it would be maybe a second or third tier option for him, and still be a pretty good one. I'd like to see him take a factory contract elsewhere, and if he signs for, say, Aprilia and joins like his buddy Bezzecchi there, then Ribola can rub his hands, I think, enjoy at the prospect of that line.
Yeah, I think I'd love to see him on the Aprilia. I don't think he deserves to be on anything other than a factory bike and a factory contract and a factory wage. Last year, obviously, was a disaster. This year, it's very difficult to see how it's going to change for him up against Mark, but he should still be getting a good factory seat. But one rider that's obviously talked a lot about getting that factory seat is Pedro Acosta. And VJ is asking us about how Acosta fares, because what happens if he goes winless again this year and he then moves to Ducati? He joins Mark as his teammate, but he joins alongside Mark where he still hasn't won a Grand Prix. And what does that do for Pedro's mentality, and how would he fare then going in where he then has to really prove himself as a guy that can win races, and you're up against Mark at the same time, Neil?
I mean, that's a very big if, isn't it? I do like VJ's hot take. It is entirely possible. I was speaking to someone over the weekend who knows people in KTM, and there were comments that few people in KTM are expecting Maverick to win a race before Pedro this year, which I thought was quite interesting.
DJ Purchase is expecting that, by the way, Neil. He says Maverick's going to be the top KTM this year.
Okay. Yeah. Another interesting hot take. I think you can basically see every time Pedro Acosta's on camera that his shoulders are slightly slumped over, and that is because he's carrying this enormous weight of not having won a Grand Prix for over 2 years now. And I think that if that was to continue throughout this year, he might actually retire in shame and just give up motorcycle racing, because I don't think he could physically bear it. If it happens, it's a tough proposition for him to go to Ducati. But I don't think that's going to happen. I think Pedro's going to win multiple races in 2026.
Also, VJ, isn't you could statistically say that Pol Espargaro was the weaker teammate? Okay, Pol won the Moto2 World Championship, but Acosta won 2 championships, and then Pedro has already equaled Pol's or beaten. I mean, Pol tied with Andrea Dovizioso, I think, for 4th place in the World Championship. Well, he ranked 5th. I think it was decided by results at the end. So Acosta is already kind of nudged up. I don't think he quite has that billing. But I think the important thing to remember with Acosta going to KTM, to Ducati, is that that's pretty much a bet by the future, I think, by the Italian factory. They're looking post-Marquez. So I don't think the emphasis would be on Pedro for 2027 to suddenly be hounding the rear wheel of his much more experienced and decorated teammate.
And sorry, Dave.
I was going to say, I think Pedro Acosta might see that differently, Ad.
Perhaps.
Dave, obviously one of the most heralded things is always your hot takes, and Craig Stanion is looking for yours on KTM, because are KTM seriously lost, and do they need someone like Romano Albasiano to come in and just sort through everything in terms of what they have available to them? Craig is saying that even with the best test riders like Danny Pedrosa or Paul, they've never really been able to make the progress that you'd expect. So he wants to know, Dave, can you explain why?
I mean, the last 2 years have been quite difficult for KTM because, the whole bankruptcy thing had a massive effect. I actually interviewed Sebastian Rister in the Sepang test, and he said that Pit Bayer was really good at actually keeping all of that nastiness, all of the real troubles of KTM away. Even now, there are still serious problems. Another 500 people have been laid off by the factory. it's still difficult. They're in a very difficult situation. But I think like I was saying, last year they seemed really, really lost. I think they lost their way at the beginning of last year, and they did have a lot of parts. This year they had fewer parts, and the parts that they had seemed to work much better. Also, Brad Binder changing crew chiefs. Phil Marron comes along. They managed to keep, on the first day especially, just keep a lot of parts away from Binder, let him get on, find his confidence, ride again, and he seems a little bit happier. So I really think it's I don't think it's right that they're that lost. I think it looks a lot worse than it is. And if you look at the progress they made over 2025, it's just, demonstrably not true that they're hopelessly lost. They are capable of going much, much faster and getting much, much closer to the front. So let's see. I don't think they need that much of a shakeup. They do have a tendency to just, build yet more parts and throw them at the teams. And if they can get rid of that, if they can just sort of let the runners get on with it, which is going to be interesting. That's what 2026 is going to be about. Everyone is developing the 27 bike at some point, and so they might see the benefits of not throwing parts at their riders.
We've got a couple of Yamaha comments as well, or hot takes, and Lots of Chops has said that he expects Fabio to get so fed up with the V4's lack of performance and progress that he pulls the Vinales and tries to blow the whole thing up. So Adam, what do you think of the chances of that happening?
I love it. That's a great take. He's undoubtedly going to get fed up with the performance, that's for sure. I would want to say that the drama that greeted his technical failure at Silverstone last year was generally heartbreaking. Dave loved it so much that he decided to wind the knife in even deeper into the debrief, as we all saw. But yeah, goodness, Fabio is not going to go on strike, is he? But it's going to be a long year, I think, for him and a couple of the other guys.
And I don't think he's going to blow his bike up, but he's going to get very, very frustrated. I mean, Fabio, with some justification, thinks that he should be fighting at the front of MotoGP right now. And if you look at the V4's performance in Sepang, it was absolutely nowhere near that. How he's going to react to suddenly being back down outside the top 10 in Buriram, maybe even lower. I mean, I don't see an easy situation for Yamaha management how to deal with that.
Just in stark contrast to that, Neil, Thomas has said that he expects Jack to be ultra positive about the Yamaha. And there's no open brackets on this, but that's obviously in the hope of a new contract as well to stay on the MotoGP grid.
Yeah, I mean, I think, that shows intelligence. I mean, Jack knows that he's not been hired to win a world championship for Yamaha, that he's there for many things, but having V4 experience and being able to offer clear development direction is one of the reasons why he's there. And that was his only MotoGP option, I think, on the table last year. And, he's putting his head down and going with that. So, I think Jack is absolutely right to be taking that approach. That is the most intelligent approach, I think, for him to take.
Yeah, Neil's on the money there. And I think as we saw at the beginning of the MotoGP launch in Kuala Lumpur, where you had Miller and Toprak, Jack is a marketable asset. And I think any team that hires him has to be tapping into that as well, because if there's, a clutch of riders on the grid that can try and take MotoGP out into other spheres and try to gain new fans, then, Miller's going to be one of the guys to do that. He's got performance goals and expectations, but then, Jack, I think it's important that he's still on the grid, and they should use everything that he offers.
Yeah, it's interesting with Jack as well, because I remember at one stage, one rider manager was explaining to me about what makes someone marketable. And obviously, Dave, you mentioned about Colin Vire earlier on, passports play a big role. But a big part of that as well for a rider manager is understanding that importance to different suppliers. And that's why Jack was always in demand by Dainese for a long time. He was one of their higher paid riders, and Alpine Stars now as well, because he's the only rider from Australia, New Zealand region that has that sort of appeal and pull, because Sen Hages is a Moto2 rider. So, if you're able to maximize that, you understand it quite well. Jack understands the game very well. That's why he was able to move from Moto3 up to MotoGP and skip Moto2 entirely. So he does understand that very well. And another guy that understands it well is Alex Ragsdale, who says that Mark won't win all of the races in 2022, but he will win more races this year than last year. What do we think the chances of that are? Because obviously Mark missed a lot of races last year, missed the last quarter of the season. But is it going to be a case, Neil, where the other riders have made that step, Aprilia and Bezzecchi, where they are more competitive from the start of the season?
I don't know if this is just a kind of situation where I'm trying to convince myself that everyone's going to be closer, or whether they are actually going to be really closer. I don't think Mark's going to have it as easy as last year. I think in some ways, last year was a bit of a perfect storm. Now, I'm not saying that if everyone was absolutely firing, they would have beaten Mark. I think Mark was just on another level, no matter what the situation was with the other guys last year. But you did have Pecco really struggling. Bezzecchi, Martin were either injured or adapting to a new bike, or both. Quartararo was on uncompetitive machinery. KTM was in meltdown at the start of last year, so Acosta was way off. You don't have these situations this year. I think, the kind of the stronger rivals, plus Alex Marquez is now a certified MotoGP frontrunner and race winner. I don't think you have these problems this time around. So I think the field will be closer. I think there'll be more variety at the front. I might be completely contradicting what I'm saying now in 3 weeks' time after we come back from Buriram, but I really hope not. So I think Mark is going to be the champion, no question. But is he going to win 10 races? Maybe. But I don't think it's going to be quite as easy for him.
I don't think it's going to be that easy, or rather, I don't think it's going to be that close. I do think that everyone has made a big step. I do think behind Mark it's going to be a lot closer. I also think that Mark was cruising several times last year. I mean, like he was just literally just getting out into the lead and then keeping a 2-second gap and managing that all the way to the end. I think he's going to have to work harder to manage that 2-second gap, but there's nobody of his caliber on that same bike. So yeah, I can see him. I think the only thing is going to stop him from winning more races is exactly the same thing that stops him from winning more races in 2025, which is injury. That's the one thing that we're waiting for, is the injury which will end his career, which will happen maybe this year, maybe next year, maybe 2 years, 3 years. But you can feel it's definitely coming.
I'll bet €20 that he doesn't win 7 races in a row again.
Oh, that's I don't like that bet at all. That's not really a good bet. I mean, like I'll bet you €20 that he wins at least 10 races.
Yeah, that's just under half the calendar. Yeah.
Where do you freelance journalists have €20 to spare on such?
I keep on making bets with Adam.
Yeah, Bitcoin.
Well, your €20 Bitcoin's worth about €10 now, just in the space that this podcast was recorded. I do think that for me, Neil is on the money in some ways, because I don't think Mark will have it as easy to win races, but I think he'll have it easier to win the championship, because he's the one rider that's going to be consistent everywhere, whereas all the other riders are going to be a little bit more up and down. So I think Mark might have it where it's a little bit more difficult to win as many races. And like you said, I'd win 5, 6, 7 races in a row. But he'll win enough races and more than anyone else, and should be able to win the championship.
Easier to win the championship than last year? I mean, he pretty much had the championship sewn up by, May, June last year?
I just mean in terms of when you look at it from the perspective that it's going to be quite difficult to win races, but it'll be easier for him to win the championship. It'll be like whenever he was up against, if you think of Silverstone against Rins that time, there was a Davi at different times. Difficult to win those races, but he was always first or second. And that's what I kind of expect from Mark, where he's always going to be there.
The thing is that if the field is more competitive, then the people chasing Mark are going to be taking more points off each other. So it's going to take, that is basically going to make it easier for him to actually win the championship.
Yeah, but also look what Bezzecchi did to him in Indonesia. You could win 9 races in a row, but then if you've shattered your shoulder and you're out for the rest of the season, then so you're just a sitting duck.
But can't you say that about pretty much anyone in motorcycle racing at any time?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean,
that's what we can't say. Marquez is champion already.
Well, yes. Well, he's champion as long as Mandalika is in the second half of the championship. He's fine. He just basically needs to skip the Indonesia rounds, just turn up in his civvies, do lots of wave to the crowds, and just stay away from anything with 2 wheels.
We got one other question in about Mark as well, or one comment about Mark as well, just because of all the talk about maybe a 1-year contract being on the table for him. And Lu Zhang has asked, if Mark does indeed sign a 1-year contract and he sees Honda make a lot of progress, what's the chances that he goes back and finishes his career with Honda? For me, by the way, absolutely zero. I've never understood why Mark would go back to Honda. But does anyone think that there's a chance that happens?
No, too much hard work. I think it would be to transition again and work with a new motorcycle. And if he does sign a 1-year deal with Ducati, you can bet your bottom dollar there'll be all sorts of clauses in there to try and tie him to another season if he feels like carrying on.
But he will sign whatever contract he wants to sign because he has the upper hand. But no, he's not going back to Honda. There's no point. He doesn't have enough career left to risk another switch to a manufacturer, even back to a team that he already knows quite well, or a factory he knows quite well. The only emotional attachment that Marc Marquez has is to that trophy that they hand out at the end of the year. The rest of the time, he just doesn't care about. He just wants to win races. He just wants to win championships. He's not going back to Honda. Unless the Ducati is a complete dog in 2027, like a proper absolute disaster, basically Yamaha V4 style right now, then yeah, he's not going anywhere.
Yeah, it's very difficult to imagine how that's going to be the case with Gigi and the team in Bologna. But one last thing to finish off, we'd a comment in from Brett as well, and he's most looking forward to the paddock pantomime in various MotoGP garages through the course of this season. So I'm going to come to each of you for your take on what he's looking forward to most. And the first thing listed by Brett was Davide Tardozzi professing undying love and support for Pecco Bagnaia while the ink is drying on the contract from Pedro Acosta. So Adam, what do you think of that one?
Yeah, I think, goodness, if Dorna are sort of hoping that the editorial or the narrative around 2027 is going to cover some of the big talking points throughout the first phases of 2026, then I think they might be slightly disappointed. I reckon we're going to get the first press releases about fresh deals coming up in the next couple of weeks. And then it will be curious to see how these teams manage riders and whatever's going on the track, in full knowledge that these certain individuals are going to be departing respective camps for the following year. You know, when it comes to also mid-season tests, what kind of upgrades they get. If Alex Marquez is vying with his brother for the World Championship, but he's already signed to ride for another team somewhere else, then how much help did Ducati really give him compared to what they did in 2025? I mean, there's all sorts of things like that. It's not really pantomime, I guess, but there is going to be some sort of twists and turns on the way.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And just to go to the next one from Brad as well, Dave, he's looking forward to seeing Fabio trying to feign an interest in the V4 project at Yamaha just while waiting for his first Honda check to clear.
He is going to be not feigning any interest whatsoever in Yamaha's. I mean, like he stopped feigning interest in Yamaha at Misano last year. So basically, after the private test of the V4 after Barcelona. So no, Fabio Quartararo is done with Yamaha. He might go back later. He might go back in 3 or 4 years. But he's done. He is out of Yamaha. He's had enough, and he's gone.
And Neil, what about the final bit of pantomime from Brett, where Aprilia are smiling through gritted teeth while waiting for Jorge Martin to fail to complete another test session or practice session?
I think that they have become so accustomed to doing this that it's just like a second reflex now. It doesn't actually require any effort. So, smiling while he misses another test session, learns that he's probably signed to go off and race for Yamaha next year. Just another day in the life of Massimo Rivola. Yeah, no,
Fabiano Sterlachini is as Jorge Martin is being driven away in the hospital in the ambulance back off to the medical centre. Fabiano Sterlachini is already drawing up the test plan for Lorenzo Savadori at the next race for what they want to test on the bike as he replaces him. So yeah, it's bog standard now.
Yeah, I think that Sava definitely has his race leathers ready rather than the mostly unbranded test leathers that you see some test riders having to use as well. So he's ready for the start of the season as well. And we're ready for it too. We've obviously got the Bury Ram test coming up where we'll be back on next week's show with that. We've also got World Superbike starting up as well. Gordo's flying out basically as this podcast drops, and I'll be flying
Gordo
out at the end of the week as well.
Gordo or Dave?
Gordo. That's cruel. That was cruel.
You're confusing top rack.
Gordo's much better looking than Dave. Nobody confuses Gordo with Dave, just to be perfectly clear about this. So
It's also much nicer than Dave.
He is so much friendlier than Dave. And the good thing with it as well is I know that we've got quite a few patrons that are actually going to be in Phillip Island for Superbikes as well. So come over and have a chat with Gordo, because Gordo is, unlike Dave, very friendly and willing to have a cup of coffee with anyone as well. So
Gordo would buy the beers.
And unlike Dave, he actually goes to Australia.
He does. He fucking loves that Australian round as well. It is worth noting. But we go at the good time of year when the weather is probably a little bit too hot and the sun a little bit too strong for Dave as well. So I've got my Factor 50 packed and I'm ready for still getting sunburnt despite putting it on every hour. But it's going to be good to get the season underway for us. And on Patreon, we're going to be busy as well. We'll have Paddock Notes shows coming up from the Bury Ram test next week. We'll have some updates from Phillip Island as well. At the end of the 2 days of testing, we'll have a season preview pod. And we've already got Alex Lowe's, Iker Lekawona, Jake Dixon all lined up for that as well. So that's going to be a fun pod to be able to bring everyone as well. So check that out on your podcast platforms, as well as patreon.com/Paddock Pass Podcast. And as ever, a big thank you to Renthal Street for supporting the podcast. Check out renthal.com, where you're able to buy all the different parts for your bike.